Welcome to Make a Memory Bear. Today's tutorial features Dandy the Dachshund. The link to purchase this pattern is in the description box below. It'll take you over to my Etsy shop where you can purchase it and you will immediately receive it by email so that you can get started with me right away today. For supplies, I always make my memory bears with a sewing machine, but this is absolutely a pattern that you could make by hand if you wish. We'll need scissors, matching thread, some pins. I do recommend a seam ripper, and the embroidery flosses if you want to add any whiskers, eyelashes, things like that at the end. I do recommend safety eyes and a nose. I'll be using 15mm eyes and a 17mm nose, and then we'll need approximately 1 bag of stuffing. We'll need about 1 yard of fabric total for this project, and I'm going to be using 2 different fabrics just to give it some contrast and interest. I'm using a corduroy that I love because it's so sturdy and stiff and it makes for easy sewing, but there is a clear wrong side and right side to this fabric, so I'll have to keep that in mind as we're putting it together. The other fabric I'm using is this plaid, and it happens to be the exact same on the inside and the outside of the fabric, so that makes it a little bit easier, and it is recommended if you're a beginner to choose a fabric that's the same on the inside and outside. Actually, the easiest of all would be to choose something like this shirt that's just completely plain. It's a solid color. It has no design to have to match up lines, and it's going to be the easiest. Now, if you have one like this is a little baby's onesie that's super stretchy, or if you have silky, satiny clothes, I'm going to strongly recommend that you buy an iron-on stabilizer that you put onto the back of the fabric just to give it some stiffness and sturdiness. So the first step is to print out your pattern, and it does print on regular 8.5 by 11 paper, and then you want to cut it out on the solid line. Next, grab your tape. We're going to be taping these pieces together. So we'll tape the body pieces together. We're going to add the head onto that, and then we'll tape together those 2 belly pieces. Because I'm using multiple fabrics, I decided that I'm going to be making my belly, ears, and tail out of the plaid fabric, and I'm going to be making the bulk of the dog out of the brown corduroy. So take a moment to decide what pattern pieces you want out of which fabric. Now for these pattern pieces, let's just use this scrap material for an example real quick. If it has a clear wrong side and right side, essentially what you need to do for each of these pattern pieces is you would need to cut one going out one direction, but then we would need to cut one out the opposite direction also. Like, let me flip it over. We'd need one cut out that way too, so we have the left side and the right side of the dog. But an easier way to do this is just to fold our fabric so that the right sides of the fabric are already together. Then when you place your pattern piece on top and you cut it out, you only have to cut it once and it will automatically give you one for the left side and one for the right side. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my corduroy, and I'm working with pants, they're kind of big and bulky, so I'm just going to cut off one of the legs so that it makes it a little bit easier to work with. And essentially what I'm doing is just cutting this leg right down the seam, and I'm going to fold the fabric over on itself so that the right sides are together. I want this fabric set up for me to be as easy as possible, for as little confusion as possible as we go along. So whatever fabric you have, I recommend placing it so that the right sides are together before you place your pattern piece on top and cut it out. And once your fabric is ready, you'll go ahead and pin the pattern pieces directly onto the fabric. Next, we will cut the pattern pieces from the fabric. We're starting with the ears, and we're going to separate those 4 ear pieces that we just cut out into 2 distinct ears. We'll make sure our right sides of the fabric are touching, and then we're going to sew right around the curved area of the ear. We're going to leave this little triangle section left open. So just sew right around that curve, quick and easy. Grab your scissors and clip tiny little slits all around the curved area of these ears. That's going to help it lay flat when we turn it right side out. And once they're turned right side out, we're going to take those little triangle tips and we're just going to tuck those back inside the ear. Now we're going to grab the body of the dog and we're going to separate this into 2 separate pieces so that the right sides of the fabric are pointing up, and we're going to arrange the dogs so that they are facing each other. So it looks like we have 2 different dogs here looking at each other. We're going to grab the ears and make sure that those flaps are tucked in there, and we're going to be pinning them onto the dog's head. Now you can use your design discretion and place the ears anywhere you like, or you can use the pattern as a guide to give you a rough idea of where those ears need to be. So once you decide on the spot, flip the ear straight up in the air and pin it into place, because what we'll be doing is actually sewing them like this, so that once we have that seam there, the ear is going to fold over and it'll cover the seam. And once you've pinned the ears on each side of the body, I like to just line them up just to make sure that they are actually in the same spot. And as you see here, mine were not lined up, so I had to do a little bit of rearranging, but just take your time and make sure it looks aesthetically pleasing to you before you sew it along that seam. Okay, ears are on. And now we're going to be arranging the dogs so that they are facing each other again like before. Grab the tail pieces, separate them into 2 distinct tails, and we're going to be making sure that the right sides of the fabric again are always touching each other before we pin or sew. We're going to be placing the tail right along that straight edge at the back of the dog, and we want it pointing down, like towards the belly, like this. We'll put a pin in place and then we're going to sew right along that seam. Okay, here's what it should be looking like so far. Hopefully you're right along with me. We're going to move on to the belly. So this one we're just going to be sewing straight across. However, there are these 2 little triangle notches, and we do not want to sew between those notches. So when I am pinning my belly, what I like to do is put my normal pins in along the seam that we'll be sewing. But when we get to that area that's going to make the stuffing hole in the end, I'm going to put some pins going in the opposite direction. I'm going to put them in horizontally just to give me a reminder as I'm sewing. Do not sew right here because otherwise I can get carried away and sew right over my stuffing hole. But once you have that pinned, just sew right along the seam. Okay, belly is sewn and we have that little stuffing hole in the middle for later. Next, we're going to grab our body pieces and we're going to be sewing the belly onto the body. So take one side of your dog and we're going to open this belly up kind of like a bearskin rug. And we're going to lay it with the right sides of the fabric together. There's this little triangle notch that's towards the front of the dog, right behind the dog's front leg. So make sure that that is lined up. And then just go around, make sure all your edges are aligned. You'll want to put plenty of pins in, and then we will sew right around that edge just on this one half. So from the back to the front, we'll sew right along there. Then we're going to repeat that same process with the other side of our dog. So lay the belly onto the other half of the dog with the right sides together again, making sure your little triangle notch is lined up. Put your pins in and then sew from the back to the front. If your dandy dog is looking like this so far, then we are ready to move on to our next step, which is to sew the upper half of the dog. So I'm going to take a moment to lay out the tail and line up all these edges. I'm going to be taking lots of pins and putting them all around, including the tail, along the back. And when I get to the head, I'm going to roll the ears up and tuck them inside because I don't want them to get caught up in any of the seams as I'm sewing. Going all around the face. And now that he's all nice and pinned, I'll go from that notch just under his chin all the way along the back and the tail down to the back where our seam started on the back. Okay, we're moving right along. And we are ready at this point to clip some curves again. There's lots of curvy areas on this little dog, so put those little slits in there anywhere that there's a curve, or look at what I'm doing. I'm just cutting off the excess on the edge of the tail and the tip of the snout because I want it to lay nicely when I fold it in half. But I really took my time to put lots of slits here before that back leg, and right here around the neck area, right along the snout, behind the neck, along the tail. All of these curved areas need those little clips so that it lays real nicely. And now we're ready to turn it right side out. The Dachshund does have some narrow parts like the snout and the tail, so you can grab something like a pencil that's not been sharpened or any other blunt kind of stick like this to help you gently turn the tail and snout right side out. But once you've done that, we're ready to add the face on. We're going to put some eyes and nose next. What I like to do is lay the face as flat as possible along that seam. Then I take my pattern, lay it right on top, grab my seam ripper, and go straight through the eyeball on the pattern and both sides of my dog. And I'm going to put just a teeny weeny little starter hole there so that it's easier for me to get those safety eyes in. And by doing it this way, I'm sure that I'm putting the eye in the same spot on both sides of the face. When you do your starter hole for the nose, make sure that you are putting the starter hole next to the seam, not directly in the seam. If you try to put a starter hole in the seam, then it could potentially unravel the whole entire face. So just put a teeny weeny hole next to the seam where you want it to be, and we'll be able to line the nose up once we get it into place so that it looks like it's centered onto the snout. We're ready to stuff him, and I usually do tail, back legs, snout, head, front legs, and then I do the belly. I like to put a lot of stuffing in the tail and the legs just so the tail stands up and the dog can stand up. But you can make this doggy as squishy or as firm as you like. Next, we need to sew close that stuffing hole, and I recommend using a ladder stitch because it creates kind of an invisible stitch when you're done. There are some really great YouTube tutorials for you to follow along with, and I will link one of those below. I love how seamless it looks when it's all done. But that was our last sewing step, everybody. So technically, your dog is done. This is Dandy the Dachshund at this point, and it is just as cute as can be and a nice, big, substantial little wiener dog. But the last step is just to accessorize it, personalize it, make this your own. You can put iron-on appliques. You could add bows, ribbons, flowers. You could put an actual dog collar on it like I'm going to do here in a minute. I'm just showing you some things you can do. But make this your own. Personalize it and add anything that makes you think of your loved one whose clothing this is made out of, or anything that makes it distinct and really makes you happy with your little dandy dog. This is also the time to grab your embroidery floss if you wanted to add eyelashes or eyebrows, a mouth, little whiskers, any personalization like that you could add on now. I love this little Dandy the Dachshund so much, and I hope you love yours too. Thank you so much for watching.